because we're going to move to the first of 4 panel discussions planned for today, which will focus on the importance of fundamental research. I think you'll agree that Claudio spoke really well on the real world impact of fundamental research. And this session will allow us to dive in a little bit more into this space and to encourage to explore the challenges and the opportunities associated with fundamental research from various perspectives. Our panelists are going to be Claudio and Ted, who you know very well by now. Ted, welcome back to the stage. Yeah, go on. We're also going to be joined by 2 further panelists who I'm happy to introduce. We're joined by Dr. Ciarán Seoighe, who is the Deputy Director of the newly formed Taighde Research Ireland, which is Ireland's new competitive research and innovation funding agency, which amalgamates the activities and the functions of the Irish Research Council and Science Foundation Ireland. Now, I've heard rumours today that Ciarán is eager to point out every time he comes to Galway that he's my cousin. He is not. So I'm happy to clear that up today. Ciarán, I know you'll get your back in a minute. And we're also joined on stage by Dr. Aideen Ryan, who is an Associate Professor of Tumour Immunology at University of Galway. Aideen is a renowned researcher whose work in the area of cancer immunology bridges fundamental discovery with clinical application, making her contributions very valuable to today's discussion. Now, welcome to the stage, everyone. Just to let you know, we're going to invite you here in the audience to ask a couple of questions yourselves at the end of the session, if you want to. So you can think about what you might like to put to our guests here. And if we have time, we will fit them in. Okay, Aideen, I'm going to come to you first. Both Claudio and Ted have spoken this morning about the importance and the value of fundamental research to this research community. I'd like to start our chat by asking you to provide a brief overview of the work that you do and also give us a perspective on how you value fundamental research, particularly through the lens of your own research field.
Sure. Thanks and hi everyone. For those of you that don't know me, as Grania introduced, I'm a PI and I work in tumour immunology and I'm based in the Lamb Institute for Translational Research over by the hospital. So I guess at its core, I'm a fundamental immunologist. We look, and my team, I lead a team of researchers, and we look at how different proteins work and how they signal and how we can understand how that affects immune cells. And we now know that immune cells and pathologies associated with immune cells are important, not just in cancer, but in lots of different pathologies. So I guess I would count myself as a fundamental researcher, but also with a translational slant. And I guess that translational slant comes from being immersed in a multidisciplinary environment at the hospital with clinical colleagues who can identify particular aspects of our fundamental research that can be applied across multiple different model systems. So in terms of fundamental research, it's critical. It's critical to everything we do. And in fact, I would say in my earlier career, I would say it was maybe a challenge because it applied to a lot of different things. And it's how do you, in an environment where we're encouraged to have impact and to identify an application of our research very early on, how do you decide what that application is? So for me, it was cancer immunology, but I also have applications in regenerative medicine. So I think the value of fundamental research is really important and it opens up a huge amount of opportunities. And I think can maybe be even more powerful than applied research because it can be switched and changed based on the findings that you observe or that you get from asking fundamental questions.
Very interesting. Thanks, Aideen. I'm going to introduce our next panelist now, Dr. Ciarán Seoighe. Ciarán, our other panelists have been speaking about the value of fundamental research. So this seems like a good time to discuss fundamental research from the funder perspective. Taighde Research Ireland is, as I just said, Ireland's new competitive research and innovation funding agency. As this is so new, could you provide an overview of its structure and your functions and clarify where it currently stands in its implementation process?
I can. So good morning, everybody, and I'm delighted to be here with you. Firstly, actually, congratulations to everybody involved in the Institute. Delighted to see this happening today. Delighted to be here with you. So anyway, let's talk about Taighde and where we are. So Taighde has been has been established. 1st of August was when we came into being. It's been on the cards for a while. So if anybody was watching things like Impact 2030, the national strategy around where we're going in terms of as a nation, Taighde Éireann was mooted there as, you know, the amalgamation of the Irish Research Council and Science Foundation Ireland. And the intent really became visible and obvious because we moved into DFERIS, Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. There is, I believe, a competition between departments to see who can have the longest name. And when we moved into DFERIS, it became quite obvious that, you know, there's a lot of things between the two agencies and a lot of synergies and opportunities. And so Impact 2030 said, look, we're going to merge these two. So that's something that's been happening for a while. It takes a while to draft legislation. The legislation coming back for Science Foundation Ireland, because it was on a legislative footing, had to be looked at, and you put into new footings and you look at the legislation again. The Irish Research Council didn't have a legislative basis. They're part of the Higher Education Authority, so that has to be moved across. So all that takes a period of time. So where are we now? So 1st of August, it comes into being. But what you have to do is once you come into being as a new agency like that, you now have to go through all the legislation. And this is a little bit of the tedious side of stuff. We've got to go through the legislation and make sure all the T's and C's and the SOPs and the programs and calls and things that we do are aligned to a new legislation. So that's the bit we're in right now. And probably in terms of what it'll feel like to everybody else is it'll feel for a while a little bit like the IRC and SFI kind of sort of lift and drop and put in there for a little while. Because one of the commitments that the minister, Minister O'Donovan actually, and Minister Harris, or Taoiseach Harris now, but when he was at the time Minister, when this was announced, there would be no discontinuity. And this is something we've often heard from the academic community, is like, just keep the programs going, give us certainty, give us continuity. But now what we're trying to do is also do a transition to a brand new agency with a brand new remit, a very extensive remit, actually, very, if you look at the legislation, the remit is very broad. In fact, it's just taken everything that was already existing, so you do all of it. And so we have to try and find a way to keep all the calls, all the programs, everything else we do open. We have a board that's just been established. The first meeting of the board was a couple of weeks ago, and now things are getting unlocked again because, you know, we had an outgoing board who didn't want to make big decisions that an incoming board would have to live with. So, you know, out of courtesy, they left some of those things to be decided. So there was a bit of hiatus, and you would have seen some of that for a while, but that's now getting unlocked. We're moving forward. Processes are being put in place. And then the other thing we're working on is, what is the new strategy and new goals for the agency? What's it going to do and how's it going to operate? And there'll probably be a couple of stages of that. There needs to be one to meet legislative needs by, I think it's the 31st of January, if I'm not mistaken. So we have to have a sort of an interim version there. And then we'll be working to do a broader one. And hopefully not hopefully. We did it before when we were doing the SFI strategy. I remember being here for it. We did sort of consultation processes. We'll do that again. And we'll do is figure out exactly what the new funding agency will do. So the main message will be a little bit of lift and drop for now. And the transition to what Research Ireland and Taighde Éireann can really be will start to take shape over the coming year.
Okay, so have patience, I suppose. It just needs to settle in. Yeah, okay. Ted, I'm going to come to you now, and I want to move the discussion from national funding to European funding. And can you talk about your experience of having fundamental research funded by the European Research Council? I know their funding calls are targets of the Institute of Health Discovery and Innovation to enable fundamental research in the Institute. Maybe you can tell us what elements are required to be funded by the ERC.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of getting fundamental research funded, the European Research Council is one of the most kind of prestigious grants that you can kind of go after to really enable your fundamental research. And what they look for essentially is, or what they enable is a project that can have blue sky thinking and can make a significant scientific contribution to your field. And I guess as part of that, you need an original idea, you need a big idea, but it has to be high risk. And for me,
it has to be high risk.
It has to be high risk, yeah. So it can't just be incremental. And for me, I was working in the area of bone biomechanics, and the project that I proposed was investigating bone fragility in type 2 diabetes. And I suppose it was kind of a new research area, and we had very little understanding of what the mechanisms were actually, that were actually causing fragility in the bone in that condition. And a major thing that enabled me was, I suppose, some kind of organic meetings that happened in the hospital, where we started talking to other researchers who were interested in bone health in diabetes. And we linked in with some of the orthopedic consultants who were able to give us bone tissue from orthopedic surgeries. So people who were getting total hip replacements. We were able to take the femoral heads from those hip replacements, bring them back to our biomechanics lab and test them mechanically. And I suppose create new information and new experimental data around the actual tissue itself. And part of what we did was, I suppose, combine that with computational models to try to, I suppose, inform kind of a fracture risk assessment as part of that. So that was the first really enabling part, is the interdisciplinary aspect. So again, the hospital being close by and being able to take, biological samples and kind of take them over to an engineering lab and actually test them. Second really important part was mentorship. I worked during my postdoc with Leisha McNamara, who had also had an ERC. And at that time, I think there was a few other ERCs in the university and kind of pockets of success. But, it kind of primes you to kind of be thinking about your longer term career plans to make sure that, where are you actually going as a PI, as an investigator? And another key thing that kind of enabled me, I was lucky that the year I applied was the inaugural year of the IRC laureate scheme. So the IRC ran a new scheme back in 2018, which mapped exactly onto the ERC process. And they did just a fantastic job of it. The proposal, the criteria, everything was absolutely identical. And they ran a really robust interview process to evaluate your projects. And that happened 6 months before I actually went for the ERC process. So you had everything primed and ready, months out, compared to the usual where you're scrambling with a few days to go to try and get a proposal together. So those three things happened, and I guess there's a bit of luck in those, but as an institute and as a university, we can kind of formalize those a little bit more to try and enable that a bit more. And what's really been positive is that we've had further success at ERC level. Again, further pockets of success at ERC with new people coming through. But in terms of, I think what's really important is the value that ERC places on fundamental research. So they fund your project and they give you 5 years of funding, but they're not, in terms of how you report the projects, in terms of what they look for, they're not coming back to you line by line to make sure, did you do what you said here 5 years ago? They trust the PI that things will evolve and things will change and that you can make decisions as your project evolves. And in that sense, they do really kind of enable the curious nature of
it's very mature
research.
kind of way of looking at
absolutely.
it, isn't it? That things will grow and change and you'll discover things that'll take you down another path. That's wonderful. Claudio, coming to you now, you're very patient. Thank you for bearing with us. You bring an international perspective, obviously, to us here today. What's been your experience in Portugal? You talked about being a small country with a large and powerful neighbour like ourselves. Do you also rely on European funding, or are your national funders supporting research?
First of all, science in Portugal, we need to look at a little perspective. 1980, virtually nothing. So in 30 years, Portugal came from being a completely outsider to having a fairly respectable position in the world stage in terms of science. And that was the result of a single man. He was called Mariano Gago, was a minister for science and technology. And he designed actually, I arrived to Portugal in 1987, and the program started that year, which was called the New Program for Development of Research. And that program was like what I was saying earlier on. It was watering the whole field. It was spreading money around so that everybody could have. And the social sciences included. This was not just natural sciences and physics and chemistry. It was also the humanities. And that made a huge difference because for 15 years or so, that provided a ground for the formation of new centers, new groups, bringing people together and starting working. The problem arose when that program finished, when politician cycles have very short half-life, even shorter these days. And then the thing started swinging, and then we started to have what I mentioned earlier is, we have to have impact. And then we were told, no, now that we've given you the instruments, you got to go to Europe. Mm-hmm. And Portugal actually did very well. Portugal contributed 1.2% of the Horizon 2020 budget. and he got 1.5% back, so was a beneficiary. And we were hitting now the almost 2 billion euro mark last year on Horizon Europe. So we were well prepared, I would say. I will just tell you how I prepared my institute. I mentioned this. So in 2020, when we were beginning to set up the legal entity, the first thing I did was to get a consultant company. And I said, look at our competences, look at Horizon Europe, and we have a year to prepare ourselves for that. That cost me about 200,000 euros. And people say, you're crazy, you're wasting our money. That turned out in 2023 to be an income of 14 million euros. So it is worthwhile doing it. The second thing that I wanted to make, to mention, and the Institute is in the perfect position to do that, we need critical mass. Without critical mass, we were 3 separate small institutes around, and suddenly I understand this idea to the virtual. But I'm sorry, not virtual. I'm a person that I need to, and I'm going to be very literal, I need to look at people in the eyes. I need to smell them and feel them. If I don't do that, I can't trust them. And if I don't trust them, I won't work with them. I mean, I'm sorry, but we are not virtual things. We have a huge part of us, which is still very, very basic biology. And that means putting people together in the same place. And the result of that is you generate incredible collaborations. We were talking earlier earlier on with people here about now that a parasitologist talks to a microbiologist, talks to a tumor immunologist, and they actually talk the same language. And then suddenly the collaborations spring naturally because, and they can only spring naturally in the coffee table, when you are meeting in the corridors. So what is happening now? My fight with the government is that we are 1.7% GDP investment in science, which is too little. We need to move beyond. Portugal needs to move beyond that. And beyond that means putting money into fundamental science. And that is what we have to fight now for the ERCs. But fighting for the ERCs is tough. There are another 258 million in Europe, people in Europe, and of those, a pretty large fragment of them are fighting for the ERCs. And so you're not competing on a smaller scale, you're competing on a very large scale. Mm-hmm. And even if you get an ERC, we had an ERC, but then he got an offer to go to Switzerland, and then in which he would get not only his ERC, but they will double his ERC. So he went to Switzerland. So we lost the guy. Mm. So, I mean, this is a competition now. We are competing with talent, for talent in a international level. Mm-hmm. And that's very important to create the conditions so that people can stay.
The rough and tumble of competition and amalgamation and speaking languages, I think it's replicated in every country in Europe, isn't it? I think what you're saying will make sense here too. Ciarán, I'm going to come back to you, talking about funding and funding internationally and nationally. How do you think we're positioned in this country to fund and enable fundamental research? And is it balanced with applied, outcome-driven research, particularly in the context now of Research Ireland?
Yeah, look, it's a big question. So the challenge for us is, we are even newer than Portugal in terms of our investment in research. I mean, we're 20 years really in Ireland, so we're still just beyond the gangly teenager stage of investment in research. And it shows when you compare it to other European countries, it's a lot easier sometimes to get across the importance of that fundamental research. Now, if you don't do it, we all know this, you keep squeezing the lemon and you hope that more juice is going to come out, but it won't. If you keep squeezing it, you need new lemons coming in. And the system can often think about, we just need to keep squeezing the juice. And of course, it'll provide lemon. And it doesn't work like that. But it's a hard sell. Now, I'm going to do something that panelists don't often do, you see, because we always get up here and we just violently agree with each other. So I'm going to disagree with Claudio on something, which is, 90% of your talk I'd agree with. The 10% that I'd probably disagree with, I'm going to ignore the 90% where I think we're all in agreement, is it's too easy to blame politicians. And that's the bit I think we need to just be a little bit better about. You can put up photographs of politicians and say, they're looking for impact, they're looking for whatever else. We are all part of that selling of the importance of research right the way through it, right? And often I talk about this, the idea in Ireland, what we need budget, we need balance, we need buy-in. There's 3 things. Our budget is very low as well. Right? We know this. We're way down, and we measure it on GDP, GNP, GNI star. We keep putting in new ones in the hope that they'll look better, right? And it just doesn't. Right? So we're just not putting the level of investment in. So we know that. Right? We also know we need to get the balance right, and that's the question. Right? What is the amount of fundamental research? What is the amount of applied? What is the amount of early stage and early careers versus advanced? Individual-led versus groups across the disciplines, across geographies. There are so many different elements. That is a really, really tricky question. We have to get the balance correct. But getting the balance correct in all of those things requires that buy-in. And here's the call to action. We collectively, right, we are responsible for that buy-in. We are responsible for encouraging politicians and others to recognize the importance and the value of research. It's too easy to wring our hands and say, oh, they don't buy it and they don't accept it. They don't. And we have to do better about selling the importance of it. And everything is selling, whether we like it or not. Every day as a parent, you're selling the virtues of broccoli to your children, or you're selling the values of, the virtues of exercise when we don't want to do it. And this is something we have to do. And you are amongst the most potent influencers in the country. You are training the new students. You are training the PhDs. You have got the best and the brightest coming out of here. And if you meet other countries and you meet their funding agencies and you meet them traveling with their departments and agencies, very often the politicians and civil servants that they're traveling with, and particularly the civil servants who make a lot of the decisions, they're PhDs from their countries. They've done research. They know research. They've come through that thing. And that is our collective responsibility. So where I would slightly disagree is we need to be collectively responsible for selling that message, for making sure that it's understood, because politicians, they're all around us. There could be another one there. They're all around us. You can pay me for that one later.
Yeah. You're one up now, definitely.
And so everybody has to, we know we need to influence them, but they are also being, asked for money for absolutely everything else. We know housing is a problem. We know, that healthcare is a problem. We know, in fact, look at the apple windfall. It's probably spent 5 times over. And I'm kind of hoping there's an apple that might fall slightly further from the tree this time. We can actually get some into research and innovation. Our own infrastructure issues we've got in the research in the universities, we know these are a challenge. But I would say the collective call to action is, this is our job. This is our ability to influence in the short term with politicians and in the long term with the students and the people we produce here. And then to get that balance right, we're not going to be ever successful as a country if we constantly squeeze. And one last thought, I know I'm kind of overdoing it,
go
but
for it.
As a funding agency now, we have a really interesting opportunity in Ireland for the first time. SFI had a very limited remit. Right? It could only fund oriented basic and applied research. It could only fund STEM, and it could only fund for the benefit of industry, enterprise, and something else in the state. It's quite all structured and in the legislation. Research Ireland doesn't have that limitation anymore. That's gone. That's the good side. The other thing that's really good is when we were in the economic doldrums, when everything was really, really difficult for Ireland, fundamental research is a very, very difficult sell, and everybody's trying to squeeze that lemon and get more juice out. It's all jobs and it's economies and industry. We're not there right now. Right? We are never going to be in as strong a position as we are right now to have that courage of our convictions to say this is where you generate the new ideas. And you know what? Economic cycles come and go, and there may be another bad time when we're going to have to be squeezing those lemons, but now is not that time. And I think we have a really good fortuitous confluence of good economic conditions, a new funding agency without the limitations there, and it's up to us to make that pitch and make that sell to say this is the time to invest, to have the courage of our convictions, go there, fill that pipeline, and be able to tap into that when we need it later on.
I mean it. That was inspiring, and I think it encourages people to take responsibility for the greater image and the greater picture, and all for all the lovely lemons that are coming through in the future. And think about it as something that we're in a great time right now. You're right. Economically in this country, there probably will never be more money around and the ability to look up and take stock. So I think the fact that you're encouraging everybody to be an ambassador for what they do is really, really important. Aideen, I'm going to come to you now. And you work, as we said, in the area of translational research, which aims to bring fundamental research with clinical application. Can you tell us the emphasis that you put on the impact of your research and how you balance the fundamental and the translation aspects of it?
Yeah, so Claudio showed it nicely in his talk earlier, the difference between fundamental and applied or translational. And, you indicated that there's not much of a difference anymore. I would suggest that probably the difference that we place on it is timing. So, for example, in the more applied aspects of our fundamental research, the impact is quicker. You can see the impact. You can actually measure it at the time you're writing your grant proposal. When you're writing the impact section is maybe the more obvious one. I guess the benefit of impact of fundamental research is the unpredictability. And I think it's really important that we embrace a part of our research that's unpredictable, because we shouldn't ask questions if we know the answers to them or we can predict the answers, right? So there's a lot of unpredictability in fundamental research. But for example, in a lot of diseases right now, there's an immune-mediated component, including cancer, MS, neurodegenerative diseases. This is coming out all the time from fundamental discoveries. Some of the discoveries that we make may be applicable, by the time we get to the end of the grant. Yeah. So I think maybe the balance of the impact statement is, you focus on the applied, but I actually think there's a huge opportunity in the unpredictability and the potential impact by, following the science, having, slowing down the pace of understanding impact to allow for that, or embracing, the length of time that it takes to come to that impact. So a lot of the time what we do is we'll have particular projects that are very fundamental, asking fundamental questions that will then allow us, to maybe apply that to something that becomes apparent over the course of the grant, and then focus on the applied parts in terms of the funding agencies, because that's what you're encouraged to do.
Do you think people are impatient to get to the end and that they don't allow possibly the project to breathe a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there is, I guess there is a pressure when you're applying for funding. There's a responsibility, right, that you have to have an output and it has to be measurable. I would argue that maybe the outputs from fundamental research may not materialize for 20 years. I mean, the most recent discoveries for immunotherapies, which have changed the face of cancer, they were discovered 40 years ago. And it took 40 years of asking fundamental questions of how a T cell works to develop a drug that we can now use to actually activate T cells and eliminate cancer. So, I'm sure Jim Allison, in his discovery, I'm sure he had other funding to keep him going in the meantime, but that's a long time to be waiting for impact. But it can be really powerful. So I think there is a balance to the applied impact and also the impact of fundamental, which may take that bit longer.
We're just in a society now, aren't we, where everything is expected to move so quickly. Our attention spans have become so much shorter, and people, as you said, feel that pressure to deliver now.
Exactly.
Claudio, I'm going to come back to you. You spoke already in your presentation about the impact of fundamental research. Would you have further perspectives from your experience that you can share with us in the context of Portugal?
First of all, it's good. I made an impact on a politician, and I do that always. I used to talk to. I worked for the National Science Foundation in Portugal a lot, and it is great. I get involved, and I'm a sort of a thorn in a lot of people's. Want to say what it is, but I'm a pain in the neck, because I keep telling them that. All this story, exactly what you said. You want to have a knowledge-based society. If you want to have a knowledge-based society, which is the only way forward, come on, there is no other way. We're not going back to industrialization and building cars. We need to move into the knowledge society for the future, and the base of that is research. And if you want to keep people to doing research, then you need to invest. And the question here that I didn't address here, actually, I had it in my talk, but I took it out because it would have been too long and then I wouldn't have been on time. I had a whole section about what is the actual involvement of public funding in what ends up being at the end translational and economic value. And I mentioned a title and a person who works in London, Mariana Mazzucato. She wrote this amazing book called The Entrepreneurial State. And she demonstrates that basically, things as simple as the touchscreen. The touchscreen was designed by somebody who was working in the radar stations in the UK, and it was fundamental, absolutely fundamental research. And it was taken by industry and developed by industry, which is the place for private funding to do it. But all these things actually come from the state being really entrepreneurial and launching these ideas. I think so. So it's not a question that we are them. It's a question that we need to work together. Absolutely correct. I didn't want to imply anything else. But then we have a problem, and the problem is that once the people move into this world of politics where you have to divide the lemon, we don't call it the lemon, we call it the cake. We need to sever the cake in different slices. Then we have a funny thing. I mean, I could show you the funding for our national funding agency, and it's flat. It's flat the last 15 years. And then you ask the question, why? Come on, there's something must be wrong, because if it's flat in terms of numbers, it means that now we've lost 25% of purchasing power. So it means that science has not yet reached the core of society in Portugal. I made this clear, we were all stars of the show for 2.5 years during COVID, and then suddenly died down and we are no longer interested. But if you go to other, not everywhere, I'm not going to use the United States as a model, but clearly very different areas of the United States are very different. In the UK to a large extent, science is entrenched. People in the UK donate money to do cancer research on a regular basis. And it's not just the people who have a lot of money. It's everyone. You know, Cancer UK is funded basically by 95% of normal people who put £10, £20 a month. So it's just a question of believing that actually science is important for everyone. And that is a difficult issue to resolve. Portugal is not resolved yet. We have more and more public understanding of science, but it's not there yet. One question, one issue that I might bring to you, and as a funder, which I think you might consider the possibility, is one of the things that Europe never did. And if we looked at the United States, always did, which was, did not do short-term funding. It did long-term funding. And what does it mean? Is that you have a grant for 4 years, and then you have a renewal of that grant if you actually fulfill your commitments to that grant. So that created a long-term perspective for research groups, which was, they could look, they could invest, in the short-term outcome, and then they had these size projects in the bottom of the drawer doing these other things, which they didn't tell anyone, but they turned out to be fantastic in many ways. So these programs now, we're now used to the program. You have a call for projects, and then you submit your projects, and you get 3 years, and then you get evaluated. Then a year and a half into the grant, then you start thinking, I need to apply again because I'm going to need another grant. And then this cycle is complicated because we waste a lot of money and effort. And this is not being taken by Europe. And I think that Portugal hasn't taken it either. So it's not a question of Ireland. And so, the States particularly had this sort of funding for young scientists, for intermediate, for advanced, renewable of grants. So it's a whole different way of looking at it. You could take your grant, so you were living in Galway and then you wanted to go to Dublin, you took your grant and moved to another. So this mobility also as well was very important. And these are simple, but I think very important issues that allow you to, I've been trying to explain to people in politics what it is to build a research group. It may take 5-10 years to build a real research group where you begin to, come out with output. And that you don't build in a day. And once you build it, you want to keep it for a while. Otherwise, the tree is giving fruit. So you need to be there to collect more and more fruit. So this stability, research needs a little bit of stability on the long term. And neither my country, maybe I don't know so much about Ireland in detail, but in general, you see it more in Germany, you see it more in the northern countries, but in my countries, I do not. We keep fighting for European funding and for national funding on a regular basis. And we do waste a lot of time, I guess.
Ciarán, do you want to jump in there and just pick up on what Claudio is saying?
Yeah, there's a lot to answer on that one, I suppose. In many ways, we have a balanced range of these. So our longest awards now are, and the biggest ones are up to 8 years. continuously. But we also have much shorter ones. Like we work quite closely with the NSF all the time just to compare notes and see what they're doing and what programs they're working on. There's an interesting thing we've discovered, in recent times. Actually, there was, we have a science for policy program that we do, and then there's sort of science policy research, and it looks into what things that we've done and then what impact they've had. And we use that as a way to sort of feed back into our programs. So we effectively outsource some of the thinking to research projects that then comes back into how the funder should operate. And just on what you were saying there, what we found with some of our really big awards, which are called our research professorship awards, when the analysis was done, they became less productive. You see, and all of a sudden we went, oh no, this is not a good metric to sort of be publishing out where it's one of our biggest awards. It's multi-millions of euros, long-term investment. And when we did the analysis on it, it's a lot less productivity. But then when you deep dive into it, the really, heartwarming discovery on the other side was actually because this gave those research professors the comfort level almost to go after the wicked problems. So sometimes when you're in research, you're a bit afraid to go after those really wicked, challenging problems because you're coming back for your ERC or you're coming back for whatever else. And you go, I didn't get that many publications out of it, or I didn't have a lot of success out of it. And as researchers, we're trained. A null result is a result. We're all quite happy with that. But when you're trying to convince somebody later on about your publications and your field-weighted citation index and your it's a hard pitch. So the big awards have actually allowed some researchers to be less productive, but in the end go after more wicked problems, which ultimately we kind of hope will, many of them won't. But the odd one here and there, all you need is the odd one here and there is going to give you something really unique and interesting. And those are the ones that really make an impact. So that's part of it. But that's what I talk about, balanced portfolio. We have short, we have long, we have in between. You need to get that right.
Okay, we're going to move on now. We are rapidly running out of time. Ted, what do you want to do?
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. Aideen, I'm going to come to you because we want to look now a little bit at the role of the Institute in enabling fundamental research. So institutes obviously play a key role in supporting research at all stages, and we've talked about various types of research. Let's now talk about the role of institutes in enabling fundamental research that's carried out by the community. You're a principal investigator yourself. Mm-hmm. What do you see as the key challenges that are faced on the ground for people conducting fundamental research?
So, in my opinion, two of the major challenges that I come up against daily, to be honest, in our group, one is infrastructure and equipment, and the lack of funding support, I guess, to keep that rolling. And I know through the Institute, Ted, there's going to be a big emphasis, and with Elaine, on core facilities and equipment. That's really welcome. But in terms of equipment that sits outside of that, I think certainly Ireland, it's a sectoral problem. It's not just University of Galway. There needs to be an injection of funding for basic equipment and infrastructure, similar to what the President talked about earlier in terms of the PRTLI initiatives. I think we definitely need that to keep up because technology is developing at such a pace. So I look forward to seeing what the Institute can do in that respect and to addressing some of those challenges. The second thing is time. It's time to think. Because, a lot of us in the situation in the University of Galway will be also teachers. So, Claudio, I absolutely loved the idea that you tell your PIs that they don't have to fill forms. I mean, that was music to my ears. So, Ted, I look forward to that. I look forward to you being able to say that in 10 years' time when you get that huge investment.
These are big commitments, but it is something to aspire to. And obviously, like the big element in the room is funding and how that's resourced. And like, I think, again, Anne made the point that, we're now a coherent collective and we have a seat at the table to be able to, I suppose, emphasize the further needs that we have. I also think that we need to value our own time as well. And again, we have, great research support at university level, and we have different pockets that would recruit their own research support. And it's something that I've done and charge it to budgets. We need to be able to find a way to do that as well and value our own time that we help ourselves, because it's not always somebody else that's going to come in and fix your problem. So we need to kind of mobilize and do that. So,
because I'm getting the feeling, talking to you all, that there's an underlying stress going on here the whole time. I think it's palpable. I don't know if you feel that way, that you need to deliver, need to get funding, and you're sort of wound up a lot of the time. And I'm sure that obviously takes your brain away from what you're supposed to be doing, which is
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see it in most of the big journals now. I think I've read 3 papers in the last month about the importance of slow productivity and time to think for science. And like you said, it's a societal thing. Everything is immediate. Everything has to be quick. But I think that's the one thing you can't afford to do, you know, for thinking about how to address problems. You do need that time and space.
Absolutely. I feel like if you're under stress, you're just going to miss things.
Yeah.
And well, there's probably an opportunity to do more on that too. And like a stat from the US, and I don't know exactly in Ireland, I guess it's probably something similar, but our US colleagues are sharing with us like a professor who's got a reasonable sized team could spend up to 60% of their time doing admin. Now, that's a lot of wasted time and effort doing admin. So, and you know what, in the advent of IT systems and AI and whatever else, now it might take a bit of an injection of cash just to join things up a little bit and get things streamlined. I mean, in Ireland, we have something like 44, 45 funding agencies. Every one of us has a different template and a different, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you could just, it would take a bit of investment, but you could get an awful lot of return from that fairly quickly. So, you know, 60% on admin, take that down by half, we've got 30% of a professor's time back.
We're getting a lot of feedback here, Ted.
Yeah. Yeah. And the big thing, and Claudio, I'll pick up on your point about investing in Horizon beforehand. I think a lot of the time, and you know, we're reacting, you know, so we almost need to be way too busy to like justify support. If we could be proactive and, you know, invest in, and again, those local supports upfront and see what fruit that would bear, I think it would be an investment in our future. And you look at how much came out of the National Centre for Biomedical Engineering and Science 20 years ago. We have an opportunity here again to build on that and do something again to see where we get in the next 20 years. So,
Claudio, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I have to because you've been naming me a little bit in the past. So I had this challenge. So in 2020, when I was charged in 2020 to install the institute. For 3 years. It was an interim program, and then there was a call for director, and in that call, I was re-elected, and now I have a longer term. But one of the biggest challenges I had at the beginning was, so we were putting people from the different institutes into this new entity, and I had to convince the human resources to move. And the way I convinced them was I give you a permanent position. But the largest number of permanent posts were not for researchers. I said the largest number of permanent posts that we gave at the beginning for these 15 transpersonal services. And the researchers were furious with me because they say, we need to spend our money in researchers. We need to hire researchers. And then I said, well, do you want to do every part of the administration, writing your reports to the financials part and everything like that? They say, well, not really. So then we need to have this administration. So what it ended up happening was that we had to, first of all, stabilize the administration. The 2 things that I stabilized was, one, the scientific services. So scientific services are run by professionals. Most of them have PhDs. These are scientific running machines. And they are PhDs. Why? Because I don't want to have every 3 years hire a new person teaching how to run the microscope. I don't. And I want these people to be here and like to be here and develop this further. But the same thing about administration, all the way from human resources, financial, accounting, and all that. Those people need to be there and they need to be stabilized there. Why? Because in the middle, you're going to have the researchers and they're going to make life easy for the researchers. Now they understand it. So once we managed to settle that, then in 2023, in the beginning, then I said, look, now we're going to start settling the PIs or the majority. So we have 67 research group. 50 of them now have permanent contracts with us. The other ones actually are from the university. They are teachers or they are clinicians. And then we are moving one step further, which is now negotiating with the hospital, in which the hospital pays 50% of the salary of a clinician, and we pay 50%. So they spend 50% of the time at the hospital and then 50% of the time at research. But it was essential. Why? Because now you want to learn anything. I mean, actually, you don't want to learn. You get an email saying, look, there's going to be a call opening for your work, specifically here. Here is the form that we have to fill in. and will help you, and this will happen, and what I need from you is this abstract and this and that. Do you want to go? But they tell you that 3 months before the deadline. So the whole idea is, I have this image all the time that I keep saying, if you want to surf the wave, you have to be in front of it. You can't be in the back, because the force is with you in the front. And therefore, for that, you need to be prepared, and you need to know that it's going to come, but not 2 minutes before. You need to know that it's going to come further back so that you are prepared to do it. So this has helped a lot. And I just, to finish, we are totally independent. That has fantastic value in one sense. We make our own decisions. Everything is independent. It's terrible on the other. I have to balance the books, and I have to balance the books every month. So we even hired an economist, and this economist, what he does, he keeps us track of everything that we're doing on a daily basis, and then he looks forwards on a monthly and a yearly basis. We have a model for our funding of our institute until 2030. With real numbers, so fairly real numbers. And that is essential because, in this world, we need to behave a little bit like a company. We need to know what is coming in, how much, if you got a fantastic grant, but you're not spending the money, then I'm not getting your overheads. So you need to spend the money. And you say, but I want to delay it. No, you can't. You have to fulfill you had this budget for the year. You have to execute it. And that's the way the system for us works. We don't have a foundation that gives us any money. 40 million that we raise, it's all competitive. And it makes us sort of keeping us on our toes all the time to sort of keep running, ahead of this thing. But basically, going back to the main issue, you need to support researchers. You need to, we haven't talked at all. We might talk about, but we need to support PhD students as well. And PhD students have a very significant need. Postdocs are a whole class of their own. They need to be thought. And the issue about postdoc and stability and stuff like that hasn't been discussed, but it's a real important issue. And then it comes the PIs. But basically, get them back into thinking and writing and exploring. That's what they're there for. Fundamental, applied, translation, a lot of it. So.
We're out of time, aren't we? Yeah. We're out of time, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, those of you who were thinking about questions. We'll try and get more questions in later on. Can you please show your appreciation to all our panellists?